I'm Miguel Badia with Ali Weitzman, and today we are speaking with student activist Haseeb Waseem. The purpose of this interview is to raise awareness and foster more dialogue and difficult conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion at Villanova. So to start off, Haseeb, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and describe your experience with activism both in and outside the classroom?
Definitely. So if you guys don't know, I'm Haseeb. I'm a rising senior at Villanova University. I'm majoring in finance and MIS. So my experience in terms of activism has kind of been a thing throughout high school, but realistically, it's actually started when my first year at college at NYU. I'm a transfer student. I ended up doing a lot of social justice activism and trying to attend and both host a bunch of social justice leadership conferences where students would come in, get training, and be more well approached to handling their various jobs through the lens of social justice and through the lens of constantly considering what race, gender, sexuality, and a bunch of other factors. So that's something that I learned and was certified in at NYU. And now I've brought it back over to Villanova. Some of the things that I've done on campus have been sensitivity training in the wake of the ongoing Black Lives Matter movement, what advocacy looks like on the digital stage, as well as like making a petition to have more race-related classes on campus overall. So that's basically like a basic summary of my personal journey when it comes to activism on campus.
So upon further research, we discovered that you founded Villanova Debate Union, and we would love to hear more about that organization and how it relates to activism.
Yeah, so basically I'm a big fan of public speaking and engaging with the other side when it comes to public discourse. A lot of the times, there's not very much a clear path forward when it comes to actively supporting members of our community, whether it's BIPOC, POC, LGBT people, or just a bunch of other minorities on campus. The reason why I founded the debate union was to try and foster that sense of public speaking because I just personally believe in the power of words. In addition to that, on a national scale, I'm actually the president of the American Parliamentary Debate Association, which runs collegiate debate in America today. One of my roles for the upcoming year is going to be liaising for the Diversity Initiative, which helps to recruit underrepresented minorities and actively retain them when it comes to the debate league writ large. In addition to that, on a more local level, the Villanova Debate Union has been very, very active ever since the ongoing Black Lives Matter protests started trending in terms of matching donations to the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project, which has been used toward helping out incarcerated people and toward fighting against over-incarceration of Black and brown bodies within the state of Pennsylvania. So we've raised, I think, over $800 so far by matching donations from both people that have donated through proof of donation receipt, and we feel very proud of what we've accomplished. But we all know, though, that the fight does not end here. Whether it's the shift toward virtual debate for the incoming school year, we're definitely going to keep these conversations active and have pledged to donate around 5% of our budget toward organizations to support Black lives.
Do you mind just giving more information for Villanovans who are listening about how to join this organization and where to find you on social media, just so they can keep up to date with everything your organization does?
Yeah, definitely. So we are a lot of the times in various debate unions, there's tryouts, but to be clear, we offer a position for anyone that's interested. The most we work with is your skill level. I came into debate without doing it at all in college. I came into debate without doing it at all in high school, which is a lot of paths that people use. So we're very comfortable teaching at all skill levels. The way you can reach out is through emailing either me at hwaseem@villanova.edu or reaching out to me on Facebook. And also, you can also reach out to the Villanova Debate Union at gmail.com, as well as look up our Villanova Debate Union Facebook page to see how you can get involved. We're very much looking forward to new members, especially during next year's debates.
So following the recent murder of George Floyd and other terrible instances of racism and police brutality, how have you and your organization reflected on the recent events? And what have you personally and with your organization been doing to take action?
Yeah, so I think that one of the most important things to recognize when it comes to a case like George Floyd is that his unfortunate death was a consequence of the very racist system that is entrenched within our society today. Very much so. The internalizing, like racism itself, people have difficulty conceptualizing as shifting more from the super external versus more toward the subconscious. It's the internalizations and the biases that we have internalized that oftentimes cloud and shape our actions toward people. For example, in the case of the police system, a lot of the times we have to recognize the origins of systems and institutions like that. A lot of the calls for abolition of the police comes from the fact that the police is a derivative off of the previous slave-catching institutions of the 1800s. So one of the reasons that I've been kind of talking a lot with the debate union has been on trying to recognize that this is not an isolated incident, nor is it, say, something that is meant to be totally unexpected, but rather is a consequence of the very racist system that's entrenched within society today. In addition to that, like I said before, we've tried to do as many fundraisers as possible to try and align with our values of providing a lot of forum for debate. We've tried to think of different ways to brainstorm activism on campus, and as well as within the American debate community overall. And yeah, we've been doing a lot of work in terms of donations, donation matching, just to try and help tangible support for the people on the ground that are most at risk for experiencing violence because of their race, most at risk for experiencing violence because of their identity.
Our next question. So you touched a bit about how you led the sensitivity trainings for some organizations at Villanova. Can you describe what sensitivity training is and its importance?
So sensitivity training is a really awesome tool that a lot of student organizations can use. I fully recommend going through it. It's a very awesome experience and can be tailored toward your individual club's focus and how racism, sexism, as well as homophobia and other forms of discrimination off of your LGBT identity can come into play with your certain club actions. The way I structured my sensitivity training with the SMT and with VST was to provide a general oversense as to a lot of different terms that are constantly thrown around in a lot of literature and a lot of research concerning gender, concerning sexuality, and providing some actionable insights that different clubs can take both on an organizational level as well as an individual level to help make sure that we are actively aware of our biases as well as actively aware to check our friends and normalize these conversations as they happen rather than keeping them in sort of a taboo, culturally taboo kind of mindset. So sensitivity training very much involves having these conversations, having those activities to help people kind of conceptualize ways that they didn't normally think of in the past.
Do you see sensitivity training as something that expands not only for like organizations, but to faculty and other members of college's community?
Absolutely. A lot of the times there's a significant amount of time where people are often so entrenched in their habits, so entrenched in their daily going abouts that they don't end up realizing that what their minute actions may look like actually contribute to microaggressions and contribute toward maintaining the system that oppresses Black and brown bodies on an intense scale. Even some type of education when it comes to, say, faculty members and students is oftentimes just very awesome because even if you make sure that a person's aware of, say, 5% of their actions versus, like, say, total effectiveness, that's still 5% less times that they're acting on their biases, 5% more times that they're more aware of their biases, and more times that they're taking actionable insight toward their quest to become actively anti-racist, anti-sexist, and anti-homophobic, sexist, all that other stuff. So definitely, I think that it definitely should come into play when it comes to faculty. There's a lot of diversity initiatives that we see nowadays that are, especially at Villanova, that are trying to incorporate this to try and make sure that there's a change, not just on the representation side, but also on the inclusion side as well, which is an important distinction.
So recently, we at VTV have reflected on the events that have taken course the past couple of weeks, and we thought a lot about like what kinds of things that we can do this year to create a more inclusive environment within our club. So what are some ways that you think student organizations can create more equitable and inclusive spaces?
Definitely. So one of the biggest ways that I see, which is kind of a universal thing that happens a lot of the time, is that even in spaces where there is some level of diversity, where there's some, say, POC or bi-POC in your organizations, a lot of the times there are oftentimes cliques that can happen where there is a sort of popular group of people. Oftentimes, this ends up being a lot of white people that often congregate in these groups and stuff and end up causing a kind of systemic, like, independently systemic kind of issue where white people elect only white people to become board members and stuff, acting off their subconscious biases. White members unintentionally creating an environment of exclusion when it comes to their POC and bi-POC members. That's been an issue that happens across all groups. I think the most important thing to recognize is that no one's sort of above this problem. I can perpetuate these things as much as you can perpetuate them. You can perpetuate them as much as, say, a dean of the school can perpetuate them as well. It's very, very clear, though, that the actions that we take to actively be aware of these things and actively have these conversations with our friends and say, oh, why is it that all of our friends are white? Why is it that all of the club members or all of the board of a certain organization can be like all white as well? Any strides that we can take toward fostering that kind of inclusive environment is once again infinitely better than a world where we do nothing. So yeah, obviously that doesn't really like, there's some certain nuances that happen with, say, organizations like BTB, which would have a specific technical focus. But off the top of the things that I can come into mind is that like make sure that your events are encompassing everyone and stuff. If you notice that there's constantly individuals that are, you know, being left out and stuff, this is just a good general rule in general. Take the time to reach out to them. Take the time to take the onus to actively make them feel included, and just be constantly aware of the environment that you're perpetuating.
So our next question is, we heard that you created a sort of account called Vectors for Change, and we just wanted to hear you talk about that a little more, and maybe it will inspire other people for other ways they can contribute to this movement with their talents. So if you can speak more to that.
Yeah. So obviously speaking, a lot of us have our like recently picked up quarantine activities. Like, so one of my things is that I actually used to digitally draw a lot when I was in middle school. And because of quarantine, I dusted off my digital tablet and saw on TikTok a trend where people were drawing over like very flat colors over their photos and stuff. And so as someone whose parents both work as healthcare workers in the ongoing pandemic, I was inspired to try and basically like open up an art commission, which is what Vectors for Change is, offer for me to draw people's photos and over their illustrations, and in exchange they can donate to either my Venmo, and I will direct the donation to one of 3 charities. It's Project Core, Direct Relief, and Feeding America, which is the first 2 are meant to kind of fight against the PPE shortage that we see nowadays among healthcare workers and hospital workers, and the last one is to fight food insecurity. So it's been a really good way to kind of keep kind of busy and productive during these times, as well as try to channel that energy into doing something good. And recently, in the wake of George Floyd, and the wake of Breonna Taylor and all these other people and all these other individuals, we've also started shifting some of those funds toward the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We started shifting those funds toward a lot of bail funds that are in the area, whether it's the Philadelphia Bail Fund or the Community Bail Fund. We're trying to definitely open it up more. So I think that it's just a lesson in that you can contribute in ways that you never thought that you would. Leverage your own talents, find what makes you happy in terms of like what you can do, find your talents, and definitely leverage that, because there's a value for everything in this world. My organization, I didn't think it would be able to raise over $500 for these kind of causes, but it has. And honestly speaking, I fully encourage everyone to at least take the chance, because even if you raise $1 single, that's one more dollar that's there than what it was before.
I don't know if you can speak more to this than I can, but I know there is some sort of crossover, obviously, between the healthcare system disproportionately affecting minorities, especially Black people, and COVID, of course, disproportionately affecting those groups as well. So you raising money for all of those foundations that are going towards hunger or towards the pandemic, obviously, like help and cross over to the Black Lives Matter movement as well. It's
super interesting to note how there's a lot of populations, specifically among BIPOC, that kind of have this, not distrust, but there is a level of discomfort that happens with local hospitals. The reason for this is, once again, very historical. Like throughout history, you can literally point to many examples where BIPOC were intentionally sterilized or intentionally like tested on without proper consent. For example, a lot of the I want to make sure that I get this correctly. I think it's the Henrietta Lacks case, which basically led to a lot of developments when it comes to neurosurgery and neurology in general. We have to recognize that a lot of the developments came on the backs of BIPOC. And that's the reason why we have a lot of, say, movements nowadays that are showing that Black individuals for example, are more likely to not sort of trust a COVID-19 vaccine. And instead of instinctively being like, oh, like that's so stupid, we have to analyze the historical reasons as to why these inequities are happening, and actively take the chance to try to understand the communities that are actively saying what they want and actively saying the experience that they've had in the healthcare system nowadays. The important thing to consider is that a lot of biases are not just historical, they are well and present now. Look to many studies about medical students believing myths on Black bodies versus white bodies, For example, the harmful and incorrect belief that Black skin is necessarily worse than white skin, is not worse, is necessarily tougher than white skin, then leads to a lot of things like, for example, a higher Black mortality rate versus a white mortality rate when it comes to emergency room visits, higher chances of post-op complications. So it's important to see these facts, to see how this is a generational and systemic issue that won't go away unless we actively take strides to stop them and recognize them.
So another way that you've helped the movement is that you helped create a petition that calls upon all schools at Villanova to mandate race-related and IGR courses in the university curriculum. That petition has almost 6,000 signatures now. Can you talk more about the purpose of this petition, what IGR is, and what inspired you to make the petition?
So, full disclaimer, the real hero behind the IGR stuff and the demand for a race-related course is Rachelle Potente. She is a master's student at Villanova University and also went to undergrad. To be clear, I think that she has done a lot of the work involved and stuff. However, she and I have been talking ever since I first saw her posting like the emails that she exchanged with Father Peter, talking about like her request for a race-related course, which got a lot of traction within the Villanova community. So we worked together and we drafted up a petition. We had drafted up this petition just because we believe that it's not just a matter of one or two voices that are behind this movement, but rather the force of the entire Villanova community itself. The fact that there's over 6,000 petitions means that there's over 100% of the graduate students at Villanova have signed it, means that over, I think around 80% of, if we take those 6,000 to be undergraduate students, that's 80% of the population of the undergraduate students, showing that this is a movement that not just the BIPOC and POC students want, but a movement that all of Villanova is trying to recognize is important to have in our education, because education is the key way for us to be aware and then actively take the strides to fight against these things. The petition is just meant to kind of bring awareness to that and add a number to kind of strengthen the claim. I actually ended up sending the petition a few days ago to each of the deans as well as to Father Peter directly, and they all, I've recently been in communication with a lot of them when it comes to what this might look like on a cross-cultural campus. And perhaps the most important development was that in the recent widespread diversity update, which saw Terry Nance being left up as the vice president of diversity, equity, inclusion, is the fact that the university is developing resources toward creating a university-wide course on anti-racist policy, as well as cultural recognition and safety policies as well. So it's clear to see that what I think that this is really kind of serving though is that Villanova is not a very activism-focused campus. There's a lot of groups that are individuals, but there has never been sort of a kind of campus-wide effort toward addressing some of these changes. However, what this has taught me though is that our voices have a insane impact, because that petition is 6,000 of undergrads, 6,000 of graduates, 6,000 of alumni, 6,000 of parents, 6,000 of prospective students, and 6,000 community members that actively want to see Villanova go better. And when we demand change, when we demand Villanova to get better from the bottom up, it shows how much power we have as students to be able to enact true change for campus that is meant to affect us for years to come. And though this university-wide course is just the first step in clearly a long line of changes that need to happen to change Villanova to a more diverse and equitable place, it is certainly the right change to show and invigorate the student body for right now.
So I was just going to ask about IGR and your experience with it. Could you explain about like what it entails for listeners who aren't familiar with it?
Definitely. So I myself have not taken IGR yet. Once again, this is why a majority of the credit in terms of including the IGR part comes to Rachelle Potente. However, from my understanding, it's a course where it's basically focused on, think of it like broad scale sensitivity training when it comes to facilitating oftentimes difficult conversations surrounding separate sections involving race, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic class. There's different versions of IGR that you can take, and it's a very important class that a lot of people have vibed with in terms of being more educational, and a lot of people have been calling for it to become mandatory for a lot of Villanova students overall. This movement has kind of inspired me to take IGR next semester. I'm signed up for the fall semester for it, so I'm really, really excited about that and to work with Terry Nance.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I recently took English class called This American Life, and they kind of
Hmm.
had the same like facilitated conversations regarding like class and race in America. And I know since then till now, my perspective has truly been broadened, and I do, like you said, like the power of dialogue is just so crazy that if we want, like as you said, like change to the culture on campus, I feel like education is the first step towards the big cultural change. So thank you so much, and thanks Rachelle too for this amazing petition that you've created. I'm sure lots of people have thought this, talked with their friends, oh, I love the IGR, wish it would become something more wide scale, and you two came together to like make that really happen. So that's like amazing. Um, so I think you touched on this a little bit, but what are your thoughts regarding Father Peter's response to this petition and the kind of changes that have been happening since I would say like 3 months ago till now?
Hmm. So I think that, so when I first initially sent out the petition, a lot of the deans responded to me individually with very long messages about like that they were considering diversity changes and stuff, and that they needed more resources to make sure that it was an effective process to both train staff, students. Father Peter's response was very much Haseeb, it basically read out as Haseeb, like I agree that but curriculum changes happen slowly and stuff like that, but it's on our radar. And for me, I was just kind of disappointed by this response initially and stuff. This was obviously before the really awesome development happened in terms of the development of the Equitas task force and the Equitas course development for across the university. But I think that the most important thing, though, is to recognize that that was when the petition had around 2,000, 3,000 signatures now. But it takes the numbers and the strength to continue going, even in the face of, say, initial discouragement or initial calm downs or something like that, to be able to keep going and actually push and effectively move forward these changes. So I think that Father Peter definitely has like a lot of considerations to consider at this point in time. However, I think though that what spurs the attention in this case when it comes to dealing with administrative red tape and stuff is also a big part of this definitely has to do with the development of @Black Villanova. I highly encourage that anyone that does not follow them, please follow them, because the best thing that I can do as an ally is to uplift the voices of the Black students and BIPOC students that have actively made an effort to talk about their experiences. So this petition is basically a form of that, and Father Peter recognizing that is a form of him finally trying to kind of rectify the changes that have led to the environment that BIPOC students experience these things on the daily across multiple generations of students overall.
And a follow-up question to that, have you received any opposition, whether it be like in your face sort of opposition or kind of like behind the scenes? Have you heard any like ideas against this, or have you received mostly support towards this change?
So it's actually very interesting. So one of the coolest things that possibly happened was the Nova Nationer account is basically the hub for a lot of alumni connections and stuff, and a lot of alumni linking into what's going on campus. They ended up posting a full-on Instagram post, like linking to my petition, asking people to sign it and stuff, and talking about how it reached like 1,000 signatures in under like it literally was like under 24 hours and stuff. I've received a lot of insane support from a lot of different people. I've had alumni DM me on Instagram that were like, hi, I just want to let you know that I'm from the class of 2014, but like, please keep doing this. You're on the right path. And that's really like what's been driving like my kind of ambition is I'm like, this isn't just a thing that's happening nowadays. This is a thing that's been happening for years and stuff. So any semblance of change that we can make, that's something I'm willing to make my magnum opus for my Villanova career. In terms of negative response, obviously speaking, there's constantly going to be the people that are uncomfortable with change and stuff. A few people have DM'd me, like they've used like troll accounts from like the Nova Nation or like link and stuff to my account. I have a public account because I just wanted to raise awareness and stuff. Some people have DM'd me like very vicious things. I've gotten like a couple of death threats, which is like funny, from like troll accounts and stuff. But the overwhelming response from people that I actually care about, which is current students, current BIPOC students, and current Black students and brown students at Villanova, has been overwhelmingly positive. And I think that those are the populations that I care about, not some people that can't handle the fact that Villanova is trying to actively become better.
So that's great that you have a lot of support from the student body, but yeah, it is a little like frightening there that you get kind of these like bad responses sometimes by like troll accounts or just people who are more closed-minded. But kind of shifting the discussion, You mentioned earlier that you are a VSB student. So how would you describe VSB's climate when it comes to inclusion currently? And what are some positives and negatives that you see? And in what ways do you think that it can be improved?
So first of all, I just want to say a lot of my experiences at BSB are definitely anecdotal and stuff like that. But a lot of the culture at BSB is very much very white focused, very much like falls into a lot of typically what we see at upper level businesses and stuff, where it's like a lot of for example, a lot of presidents of, say, student organizations at VSB will oftentimes be white and stuff like that. I haven't kept up too much in terms of that stuff, but there's also just a general sense of the overwhelming whiteness that happens within, say, a finance field is very much present and symptomatic at VSB. I think that there's current efforts to change it. I actually got off a phone call with Terrell Drake, the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, who's now heading the Diversity and Inclusion Office specifically for VSB, as well as Joyce Russell and Dean Sherman. And I can't technically disclose there was a lot of stuff from that call and stuff like that, but basically the reassurance is that there's not just efforts toward increasing representation at VSB, but toward increasing inclusion, because it doesn't matter if there's more representation, because if there's a non-inclusive environment, all you're doing is subjecting more and more people to that kind of toxic place. So I think that the positives are that there's going to be changes coming, some tangible changes coming when it comes to greater resources and greater support. But I think, though, that the culture right now is very much leaves a lot of room for improvement. Yeah.
I think that is definitely a very important distinction that you made between simply just changing the demographics versus being more inclusive. That's something that when we talked to the National Association for Black Accountants a couple of weeks ago, they brought that point up as well, that it's one thing to simply add more people of color to the business school, but it's a whole other thing to make it a more inclusive environment.
Definitely.
Yeah, and it's important to note, I like how you mentioned that a lot of your accounts of this environment are kind of anecdotal, because of course you're not Black, and a Black student experience in Villanova can, obviously differ. And I feel like that's important
Absolutely.
to understand, coming as a white person, I can sit here and say, I've had a great experience with VSB. I feel so included. I feel like it's my second home, but that's not everyone's experience. And just because you don't see that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So just because it happens behind the scenes doesn't mean that we can just ignore it and be apathetic towards it. Because at the end of the day, this is our school. We want to be proud of it. We want to be this is the best place. We're proud to be a part of Nova, and I'm excited for these changes, and hopefully it can be a place that we can all grow to become more and more proud of. Do you have any other sort of ideas the school can do to help with anti-racism efforts?
Absolutely. I gotta say, one of the biggest things has just been the disproportionate amount of funding that's been relocated on a student activity basis versus toward a lot of fraternities, sororities, and a lot of other interest-based clubs, compared to a lot of the very small and oftentimes just not sustainable budgets of a lot of smaller organizations, like a lot of cultural organizations. This has been talked about extensively by a lot of Black leaders within our community already, in terms of how there is just I can't even explain how much is ridiculous. And this is as someone that's a beneficiary of this kind of system. The debate union has received a lot more money than it actually should from the organization budget, considering we have a very good stable source of revenue streaming to begin with. So I'm just fully want to call on the Office of Student Involvement, as well as individual schools' student involvement kind of funds, to make sure that we actively try to increase programming for the cultural groups on campus. Because when you don't have a lot of programming, you're not able to attract the attention from, say, people that may not know about these organizations to begin with, which leads to a self-perpetuating cycle where people feel more and more isolated instead of being able to find their communities. So that's definitely just the top of the list, most important thing in terms of shifting allocation funding toward cultural groups on campus.
So our final question that we have for you, Haseeb, is what is your advice to Villanovans who want to become better allies and become more involved in activism on campus?
Yeah, so I think one of my favorite quotes is, the quest to become anti-racist is not simply one where it's a hurdle to jump over and achieve, basically. That's the general gist of what the quote says. But rather, it's a constant process that requires you to really analyze yourself, because the best thing about trying to be more anti-racist is to recognize the fact, is to like not hold yourself toward a cancelable standard. You don't have to cancel yourself to become anti-racist. You can recognize your past behaviors as to be part of a perpetuating a system that actively oppresses Black and brown bodies. And so my thing is, seriously have the conversations with yourself, have the conversation with your friend group, because it shouldn't become a taboo kind of process when it comes to talking about people's identities. Rather, it should become a normalized conversation that we constantly think about, because when we actively think about them, we actively think about our biases. This is obviously, you see a trend in what I'm saying. We think about our biases and we take more and more of the actions that it takes toward becoming anti-racist and making the environment around us more and more anti-racist overall. And secondly, just to go back to a previous point, make your voices heard. If there are changes that you don't like if there are changes that you want to see on campus, if there are systems in place that you don't like on campus, make your voices heard. Make petitions. Go out and protest social distantly, because that's a thing. Where there's so many efforts that you can do individually, and I guarantee you it's not going to be just you that are feeling these changes. Rather, you are going to be single-handedly putting a voice to a lot of movements on campus that people have been too afraid to say before. So take the leap, actively commit toward this journey, and if you want to see the changes, be the person that incentivizes them, be the person to act on your desires for change.
This marks the end of our interview. Haseeb, is there anything else, any final messages that you would like to get out to the Villanova community?
I don't know. First of all, thank you for a lot of support when it comes to efforts like the ongoing IGR and race-related course curriculum. Thank you so much to my friends for supporting me, because there are times where the hate sometimes can get overwhelming and stuff. So I really want to thank a lot of my friends, specifically Daniel Gorman and Emily Monaco, when it comes to actively making sure that I'm doing the right thing. Thank you to Rachelle for inspiring me with what your personal actions have been, and that we have kind of created a thing that's actually led to changes. And lastly, all of my efforts are nothing if not for the struggles of the people that have come before me. All my efforts are nothing if not for the brave people that have talked about their experiences on campus, brave people who have talked about their experiences on platforms such as Black Villanova, as well as their own personal stories on Instagram and social media. This is entirely for you. It has nothing to do with anyone else, because the moment we can make campus better for all of us that have undergone that stuff, that's the moment that Villanova becomes the equitable, Veritas, Unitas, Caritas place that it's always tried to be.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Haseeb. We truly appreciate you sharing your ideas with us and your perspectives. We hope that this interview will help open up more dialogue about racism and other social issues on campus. I'm Miguel Badia with Weitzman, and this is Haseeb Waseem. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much.